I think my unpopular opinion is we need to abandon San Francisco. And
Oh.
yeah.
Okay, we need to unpack this. Bima.
The Brian and Hsu Ken show is officially back. Brian and Hsu Ken, welcome back to your own show.
I didn't know we had a show. But
I was going to say the opposite.
To be here.
I was going to say the opposite. Every episode of our show is us being back.
Yeah. And now we are officially back because it's been a few months since the official first episode. So to our viewers out there, if you're new here, Brian and Hsu Ken are the managing partners at Iterative. And I'm June, the producer and host. You might know me from, if you watch our previous videos, you might know me from the hashtag. Guys, what's the hashtag?
Help June with her OKRs.
Help June with her OKRs. For today's episode, we're doing 5 questions with Brian and Hsu Ken. Now, this is a highly requested video because people often come up to the both of you with a bunch of questions. And we thought it'd be helpful to answer some of them here. The premise is pretty simple. I ask you guys 5 questions, and you both answer them. We have 6 categories. The first is startups. So questions about anything to do with startups, starting a company, growth, etc. The founder experience is a second category. So what it's like being a founder. The third category is personal. So these are like more private, more questions. Nothing to do with startups, nothing like that. Fourth category is tech news. So these are questions that are related to the technology or trends in the technology world. Lastly, we have spicy. So these are the hot questions. I'm excited for spicy.
I feel like I'm on Jeopardy.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah.
We're going to start in that order that I gave. So we're going to start easy. We're going to do startups. First question. Hsu Ken, you can go first.
Sure.
The first question is, what do you think are the 3 differences between starting a company in Southeast Asia versus San Francisco?
A couple of things come to mind here. I think the first thing that is different is the amount of money startups need in Southeast Asia is less, and primarily because I think the salaries are lower. And so people who are raising, I don't know, $2 million in the US, their team size is only going to be like 5 people because their salaries are so high. But if you raise $2 million in Southeast Asia, you're hiring like 50 people or something like that. And so I think just the amount of money it costs to operate startups in Southeast Asia is lower than San Francisco. And so you just don't have to raise as much. So that's one for me. 2, this is going to be hard, Brian. It's going to be hard for you to go after me. I got to take all the easy ones.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
2, you have to open, I mean, this is an obvious one, but you have to open in another country, a market, much earlier than in the US. The US, we never thought about international expansion. Like, you just need to win the US, basically. And I think in Southeast Asia, you're doing country expansion before like Series B or something like that. Maybe sometimes like Series A, if you're in Singapore. And so you just have to expand much quicker, which means the entire process of running a company is like more complicated because now you have offices in different places and you're working with people who don't speak the same language as you. And so I think that's trickier. And then I think maybe the third part is you're hiring from a pool of people who have probably not worked at a startup before. And so I think there's just different things that you're kind of like looking for. In San Francisco, you're just hiring a bunch of people who've all worked at like 10 startups before they I feel like there were times when Brian and I hired people in San Francisco and they had more startup experience than Brian and I. Like, they're like, oh, you guys are starting your second company. I've worked at 6 startups. And we're like, oh, okay. And so they're like telling us about kind of startups, and that's just unlikely to happen here. So those are my 3.
Brian.
It's so much harder when
Okay, how about, do you agree, disagree? What would you add on to it?
100% agree. I feel like those are maybe the top ones. To throw another one out there, fundraising is very different, I think, mostly because of the kind of like investor demographic, where I think Asian investors typically are a little bit more collaborative. They like to work with each other and not think independently. Whereas like every single San Francisco venture firm takes pride in having an opinion that nobody else has. And so it makes it, I think, slightly easier because there's more investors with more money who are kind of like independent lead investors.
Just to add on to that, maybe it's like it's such an American thing. It's like the investors in the US pride themselves on some contrarian opinion. Like you're not a real VC unless you have some contrarian opinion, and there's so many investors, so they all have to have contrarian opinion. So no matter what you're doing, there's like somebody who kind of thinks how you think, whether it's kind of like right or wrong. And that's just kind of like less the case in Southeast Asia.
The second category is founder experience. So Brian, you take this one first.
Sure.
If you could go back in time to the moment you decided to start your first company, what advice would you give yourself? Maybe give people context. How old were you? What year was it?
Brian was 18. Hsu Ken, you want to? I feel like you want to say something.
The thing I was going to say is a funny add-on to this is, okay, Brian and I started our first companies together. And so I want to hear what advice Brian would give himself. And then I want to give Brian advice when he first started the company, and then we can switch. Yeah.
I was going to start with, I'm not sure if you should be working with this Hsu Ken guy. But maybe we'll skip past that one.
No, you should go deeper. Go deeper.
Go deeper.
For context, Brian was actually trying to recruit my brother, and then somehow got me as part of the deal. And so Brian, maybe that's the advice you would want to give yourself.
Yeah. Be like, do we have to do the package deal, or or is it okay not to it? Best advice for myself being a founder in the very beginning. I mean, I think for the serious one is, I think, very obvious. Hsu Ken and I knew nothing about building startups, absolutely zero. And this is
we thought we knew. We thought we knew though.
Yeah, we were so yeah. And this is way before kind of like Eric Ries's Lean Startup was out, right? And so we spent 8-9 months just building without kind of like launching anything to market, going to customers, talking to them, etc. And that was just honestly a complete failure. And so best advice for myself is don't do that. I really feel like we kind of like wasted a lot of time at the very beginning.
Got it. Hsu Ken, advice to 18-year-old Brian?
Advice to 18-year-old Brian.
I thought you had one. You were so excited to jump in.
I don't know if I have one. I don't know. Be nicer to Jessica. I don't know. You were pretty nice to Jessica, though.
Brian, were you not nice to Jessica?
We got to have Jessica
Always
on
nice.
here sometime.
Always nice.
Do I have actual advice for Brian?
Is it the same, along the same lines? Don't do that.
I mean, if you're asking me the same question, it's 100% that. And just to kind of like elaborate on that, it's we had an idea for a startup that I think Brian pitched us. He made like some crazy 100-slide deck or something like that. We started to work on it, talked to 0 users, like none. And then in the course of working on it and not talking to users, the idea just kind of like kept morphing and expanding. And we see this a lot now where we're kind of talking with startups, but it's like, it wasn't, we didn't scope the idea down enough when Brian was originally pitching it. So we always tell startups they need to focus. And the idea was not focused at all. Just to start with, it was like not focused. It was probably like 10x too big. In the process of working on it, we 10x'd it again because we were like, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And wouldn't it be cool if we did that? And so it took us like, 9 to 12 months of like coding. And by the way, all 4 of us are technical, right? And so it took us 9 to 10 months of like coding what we thought was an MVP. But when Brian and I started, I don't think MVP was like a word yet, Brian. Brian, do you think it was? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lean Startup hadn't come out yet. There was none of that stuff. And so a lot of these words hadn't been invented yet. And so validating an idea which we talk a lot about, like, I don't think was like a term yet. MVP was not a term yet. I think product market fit was like probably going to be used by somebody like 2 years later. Like that wasn't a term yet. And And so, yeah, that was by far our biggest mistake. And actually, we made a lot of changes immediately after that to like specifically like avoid that. And I think all of the kind of like good fortune that came after that was because of the changes we made. Maybe the one thing, if I was going to give ourselves other concrete advice, it would also be stop debating so much. You don't know how much time Brian, Suhan, and Ian and I would just debate on some feature thing, like hours. We had hours long meetings to debate some feature. And Brian, remember our joke used to be, it's like, oh yeah, you better bring your armor today because like we're gonna have this like really big debate about something. Because for us, it was like going into like intellectual battle, and it was going to be 2 hours long.
It got so bad that we decided at some point we would just play card games to decide.
And by the way, that would only happen after we debated for 2 hours. And so we would waste 2 hours debating about this thing that none of us actually knew anything about. Then we would spend an hour playing card games to decide the thing. And then we'd be like, oh, the card game is fun. Let's play again. And so we'd spend 2 hours playing card games. And so it was just like a colossal waste of time. And it ended up being we were all wrong because none of us actually knew what was going on. None of us had actually talked to any customers, and just like it was all a waste of time. Right. And I think that's why Brian and I have like such strong feelings about it now when we talk to startups, is because we went through that experience. So on some sense, Brian, I feel like it was like useful for us to go through, but from a like, was this a good use of our time? Like, absolutely not. Like, Brian, I don't know how you feel. It's like, we probably wasted 18 months, like full-time 18 months, just like doing this, like for nothing.
Easily.
Yeah.
Okay. So the advice is stop debating. And I'm hearing like focus. Is that the advice?
If we're going to do concrete advice for people, I think it's the obvious thing. It's like, talk to users, right? Like, don't spend 9 months in a cave, like coding until your like hands bleed. Like, go talk to users. Two, which is probably a version of the same advice, which is don't debate so much, go talk to users or get it out. Like, have the real world decide whether what you're doing is right or wrong, rather than being like, Brian can construct a more like compelling argument than I can about what the world is going to do. Like, you know what's the best way of finding out what the world is going to do? Give it to the world, right? So, and again, I think that's like another form of just like talking to users or releasing things quickly. And for context for people, we went from releasing in this like 9-month, 12-month cycle to releasing every single week. Like, if we had a new idea, it had to go out the next week. No exceptions. And so that was quite a big change. And I think that changed kind of like everything for us.
Okay. Before we go to question 3, Brian, advice to 18-year-old Hsu Ken. 18, 17?
No, I was older. So, okay. For context, Brian graduated. How old were you when you graduated college, Brian?
17.
Okay. So he was some like weird wonderkin person. I was the slacker kid who like almost didn't make it out of high school. And so I think I graduated college when I was like 22, 21 in the US, you like 21, 22. And so Brian, I think you had like 1 year more work experience than me, but you were like 4 years younger or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, Brian, advice to younger Hsu Ken.
Younger Hsu Ken. Hsu Ken was a perfectionist. Very kind of like early on.
Yes.
And so I don't know what the exact advice is, but like, it's like,
don't be so precious.
Don't be so precious, or like,
that's the advice I'd give myself.
Yeah. So, and it was kind of like all part of this, everything had to be perfect before kind of like users see it, other people see it, etc. And so I think that was the biggest piece of advice.
Okay. I know what advice I'd give Brian then.
Okay, go ahead.
Be more precious. Like, whatever. Like, he's like, whatever. It's fine. Like, he's like, it kind of works, right?
That's exactly right.
We had so many debates. And by the way, maybe for context for people who are like starting companies with people, Brian and I were not friends before we did this. So we didn't know each other very well, like at all. And so it's not like we went into being co-founders being like, okay, Hsu Ken is really precious about stuff. By the way, I didn't know I was precious about stuff. I was so like, we were so young. And we didn't know that Brian was kind of on the other side of the spectrum. So we didn't know there was going to be this like clash of like, and by the way, it was a clash of like, Brian was like fine with a lot of the stuff that we were kind of doing. And I was like appalled by everything that we were doing. Right. And so we had to like find some middle ground of kind of like, I mean, in the end, clearly the answer was like, it's somewhere in the middle. Right. Like I was like way too precious about stuff. Like Brian could be more precious. Like, and that's where we kind of ended up kind of like figuring out. And by the way, I think our roles kind of ended up being in sections where these things were kind of like, we were better suited for these things. So I always ran product because I was like kind of more precious, right? And Brian ended up being CEO and kind of thinking kind of like higher level stuff because he kind of, his brain kind of thought more to that. And my brain kind of lent itself to kind of like details. And so like it all kind of like worked out that way. But like you didn't know this. We didn't know this when we started.
Nice. I like how it's the complete opposite for the both of you.
I just think that it's interesting because I think other co-founders will have similar experiences, but the things that are
Yes.
opposite are the things that will surface.
Yes.
And it could be like other things, but that's why this one for us sticks because it was just so different. The kind of like value system was different.
And I think at the end of the day, the opposites are actually really helpful and useful if you can sort them out. Like I do think in like moving forward, me being more precious and Brian being less precious and kind of more focused on other things like actually worked well for us, right? It made us kind of more effective, but like we kind of had to figure it out. First we had to figure it out. And by that, I mean, we had to figure out individually that was the case for each of us. Like I didn't know this about myself. Then we had to figure out how this is going to work as a team and get people in the right slots. And then I think it's very effective. But I think a lot of founders, everybody has something like this, but the difference between like it being counterproductive and productive is do they figure out how to like put this to use in the best use of kind of like the team. And if they never figure it out, they just fight all the time. And then it's kind of like, they're just kind of dead.
All right. Moving on to the next question. Guys, we're going personal now. Not too personal, but still personal.
I thought that was pretty personal.
Brian just told me that I was too precious. How
I
is that
know.
personal? Like, what are we talking about?
I hesitated too. I was like,
I saw it.
Oh my God. You guys, viewers, you guys see it now. Complete opposite. Okay. Next question. How have your lives changed after selling a company? Hsu Ken, you can go first. And maybe let's go, maybe pick a category, like relationships with people or money. Pick a category.
I was just laughing because, Brian, I'll just take the dating category since you never did that one. Okay, maybe like, and again, Brian and I sold the same company. And so we sold the same company. And so we sold the company at the same time. And so kind of like our lives changed at the same time. And so, this is kind of like a unique situation where I think we had similar kind of like catalyst. And actually, Brian and I have never talked about how it actually kind of like changed any of our lives. I think we just like acted like it didn't happen and drank more boba. Maybe the story for people is, a quick story for people. We sold our first company to eBay, and then they cut eBay. I think I can say this now. eBay forgot to cut us our checks for like 4 or 5 months. And so at one point, we were sitting in eBay's offices for like a few months, and I think Ian came to us and was like, "Hey, have you guys got paid? Like, have you guys gotten your checks from like selling the company?" And I was like, "No, have you?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird." And then he like walked over to Brian, who was like sitting on the other side of the cubicle. He was like, "Hey, Brian, have you got your check?" And he's like, "No." And then he walked over to Hsu Ken. He was like, "No." And then we like groups got together and we were like, because look, we were young founders. We don't know how this works, right? Like maybe it just takes time. Like it's a fair bit of money. Like maybe it just takes time. And then we were like, "Hey, should we have gotten paid?" And we were like, "Oh, maybe we should ask someone." And so we went to Mike Frigid-Bima, he was a CEO of our company and that kind of stuff. I think we went to Mike and we were like, "Hey, Mike, should we have gotten our money?" And he was like, "You guys haven't gotten your money?" And we were like, "No." And he's like, oh my God, hold on. And he like ran off to talk to somebody at eBay to like figure out what was going on. And basically the bank had forgotten. And so I remember the day that somebody came to our desk and handed each of us envelopes. And we were like, what's this? And we like opened it. And it was like basically a check for like, more money than any of us have kind of like seen. And we at lunch, we all filed out to the bank to go like deposit the checks. And then the bank basically like kind of freaked out a little bit because they were like, why do you have a check for so much money? And then why are there 4 of you? And is there fraud or whatever? And so they like called us to the back. And I remember immediately afterwards we deposited, we were like, I feel like we should like celebrate or something. I think somebody was like, we should celebrate or something because like, we like sold a company, right? And the only thing we could think of doing was going to get bubble tea. And so we walked from the bank to like the bubble tea place across the street, got bubble tea, was like, okay, cool. And then we just like went back to the office. Like, that's it. And to this day, that is the only time that we've like celebrated. Brian, I think that's it, right? We just got bubble tea and went back to work.
I don't remember the celebration at all. It was
really?
that important. It was that important in our lives.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know. We that's just kind of like who we were. But to the question of how did it actually kind of change our lives, or at least for me. Okay, maybe I'll tackle this in a couple of ways.
Did it make dating easier?
No, harder. Harder.
Oh.
Okay, I'll just talk about the dating one first. Okay. Did it make it easier in getting dates? I think so. Right? Because then, it's like, I started this company and like, whatever, right? Like, do you guys remember the Social Network scene where Sean Parker has this like one night stand, and then afterwards the girl finds out that he's Sean Parker? I remember watching that scene and turning to my friend and being like, that is bullshit. And the reason why that's bullshit is in Silicon Valley, if you want to get a date, you talk about how you are Sean Parker and started Napster before like that happens, not after the fact that happens. So like that is complete nonsense. And I think it's kind of that way where it was like, I think if you sell a company or something, I don't know, people like want to go on more dates with you or something, or they think you're rich and so they want to go on more dates with you or whatever. So it's easier to get more dates, but you have to be more careful because people just might be going out with you because they think you have a lot of money. And like I had dates where like, I don't know, from like Tinder or Coffee Meets Bagel, where it's like, I'd literally never met them before. I've never talked to them before. I did not tell them I like did a startup, and they will like Google me before they get in. And by the way, there's only one Hsu Ken Ui. And they will sit down at dinner and be like, literally the first thing they'll say is, so you sold the company to eBay. And I'll be like, oh, okay, that's where we're starting here. My mother also, on the day that the news was announced, told me that I could not date anyone that I didn't already know. That was her advice to me.
Oh.
Yeah. I was like 27 at the time, and I was like, Mom, I think that's highly restrictive. And she's like, from here on out, you don't know what people are going to like want from you. And I was like, oh, okay. But it's like a tough way to kind of go through life. So dating easier and kind of getting dates harder, and that you have to kind of like filter harder in that way. Maybe the only thing I'll add, and I'll turn it over to Brian, is, and Brian and I are both kind of this way. We're not very fancy people. And so like, honestly, I feel like I deposited the money and it just sat there for like years. Like neither of us, I mean, I know this because I know Brian and Sam. Neither of us bought new cars. We didn't buy a new house. Like I literally don't think I like bought anything with it in any kind of meaningful way for like years. Actually, to this day, I don't think I think the only thing it kind of did was it just gives you some level of financial freedom so you can kind of do what you want. And for Brian and I, that just meant that we could like do more startups and have the freedom to like do that and kind of like not really worry about kind of like, I don't know, paychecks, at least for kind of like a reasonable amount of time. And so I think that's the only difference it kind of had on my life. But Brian, what about you?
I'm going to pick a different topic, not money or dating. I think the biggest, I've actually never talked about this. I don't know if you felt the same way, Hsu Ken. I actually feel like the biggest feeling I had was disappointment. And I think why was because I was like, company got bought, it kind of got integrated. 2 years later, nobody's just gonna know this, right? Like nobody will have heard about our company or like done anything. And they were kind of like eBay bought it to do the exact reverse of what we wanted it to do. And so I think my like primary feeling was I was actually really disappointed. And so the biggest change for me personally was I was like, that can't happen again. Uh, we have to build something bigger. It has to last forever. I need to make this happen. And so I think that kind of like, that was big inflection point or like pivot in kind of like how I don't know, I approached the next kind of like few things and similar, kind of like more serious, but like everything Sugan said was exactly true, right? I was like, didn't even think about the money, didn't even think about anything. I was like, what am I going to build next? And how am I going to be better? Those were the kind of like, I don't know, primary thoughts.
By the way, my feeling wasn't actually disappointment, Bima. It was relief.
Oh.
And it was relief because I was just like, I mean, we were like, you negotiate with eBay. You don't know if this thing is going to happen. We've been working on the company for like 6 or 7 years. We're always like months from dying. And so to me, when it like sold, I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe we pulled it off. That was like the thing. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it didn't die. And I can't believe we like pulled this off. Right. But I do think Brian has always had more of an interest in kind of starting something that like people will remember is going to be like this really big thing. I think that's like a thing that's more important to Brian. I've always just kind of like thought of it as kind of like a fun adventure. And so I'm just kind of along for the ride kind of thing. And so I think it kind of shows up in kind of how that goes.
I think it's interesting that we like verbalized it because I don't think we kind of like have, I don't know, focused it down right to like a feeling. And so
yeah, and maybe this will kind of go into like how Brian and I are. Brian and I like never talk about it. Like we never talk about like the acquisition or like anything like that. It was a thing that happened. We like got bubble tea and we like kind of were like, okay, what are we going to do next? Right? Like Brian and I did not stay at eBay for very long. And, honestly kind of like left quite a bit of money on the table because we were just so like wanted to get started on the next thing. Like that was like our big thing was like, we want to move to we started the company in Seattle. We wanted to move to San Francisco. We wanted to start our next thing. Like that was like an all consuming kind of thought. So yeah, I don't know. We spent very little time kind of just like thinking about it very much.
We're moving into tech news now. What do you both really think about the surge of AI companies?
Oh.
Brian, you can go first.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I really want Sukan to go first on this one. I feel like Sukan has stronger opinions. I think Sukan's opinion is it's all kind of like BS, right? And then you'll go deep into why it's all BS. Okay, so my opinion is this stuff has to happen. Like if you go to every single kind of like tech wave, right? Just kind of like 99% of stuff people try is complete like BS, right? And it's like really, really stupid. I just remember the first time the iPhone came out and everyone was building apps. The number of like really, really, really useless apps out there was kind of like, yeah, they were so dumb. But like people were kind of like constantly inventing and testing and trying these things. And so I think typically during these waves, what tends to happen is everyone jumps in because there's kind of like this like gold mine of things, right? And then you're kind of like trying all these things. And I think we should celebrate, right, the kind of like innovation and kind of like so that's happening there. And then I think the other thing that happens is like there's kind of like a set of people who go in because they like just want to make a lot of money, and there's a set of people that go in that kind of like are actually like innovating and building. And so then it becomes really hard to kind of like differentiate these two things. If kind of like does the kind of like AI craze add net good to the world? I think it does, right? Because like eventually we'll discover something that's quite interesting, and then it'll help, I don't know, automate a bunch of things that we're kind of like doing in the back. Is it causing a lot of kind of like confusion and bad money is being deployed into kind of like lots of things that probably shouldn't exist? 100%. So that's my quick stance.
I think my stance is not that different from that. I mean, I think Brian and I now have kind of like old enough to have seen waves of kind of like technology. And I feel like the waves between the crests, like how long between the crests, is kind of shortening. So we're seeing more of these in the recent years than it's on shorter kind of like time frames. The cycle is always the same. Brian, I forget what the name of that is, but there's actually a name for kind of the like adoption cycle, right? But this always kind of happens. This is not new. I mean, it happened with kind of like Web3 kind of like recently, right? And it's always kind of the same. There's always something that kind of like comes out. People get very excited about it. And like Brian says, everybody kind of like jumps in to be kind of like part of the wave and part of the craze. Brian, to your point about, Hsu Ken thinks most of it is kind of BS. I do think most of it, there's maybe think about it in terms of like signal to noise ratio. And I think there's just in these early phases of these new trends, there's just way more noise. Like the signal to noise ratio is just like really high noise right now. And it was the case in Web3. It is the case here. If we look at the time frame of like, I don't know, 10 to 15 years, and we kind of look back in this, we're going to be like, okay, yeah, this was like a real thing. And Brian, I'm curious whether you're kind of more bullish on AI or more bullish on Web3. I'm more bullish on AI. That doesn't mean I don't think some Web3 is going to happen, but I think, 15 years from now, I think like AI is probably going to have a bigger impact on the world than kind of like Web3. They're both going to have some impact. And so I think that's just where we are. There's just a lot of signal to noise. It's appropriate. That's how it goes. People should be trying stuff. They are trying stuff. I think part of our job as kind of investors is to try to pick out the noise from the kind of signal. But like, if I was like 22 again, I would definitely be starting an AI company probably, right? Brian, we would probably be starting an AI company. We were all like computer science and math people. Like that's what we would be doing. We probably would start a company based on an idea that like, I think is like dumb now, right? Like we get a bunch of AI companies. I think some of the ideas are kind of dumb. Brian, you and I would have started one of those dumb ideas. Like,
yes,
that's how it goes, right? And so I think there's nothing wrong with that. That's how these things go. But, at Iterative, we have to kind of try to pick out kind of the signal from the noise stuff. And so we're kind of trying to pick that out. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's exciting. It's fun. I wish I had more time to kind of like code some of it, Brian, and kind of like muck around with it. But, I don't know. I haven't had time to kind of play with any of that stuff in a long time.
Last question. This is really short because the question is, this is spicy, by the way. Well, slightly spicy. If you could have your own billboard with an unpopular opinion on startups, so billboard, and so you can't put a lot of stuff there, what would it say?
Is it for founders?
For founders. So imagine it's like, I don't know, Silicon Valley billboard there.
You should see the Silicon Valley billboards. They're like definitely not advice.
Oh, this is a hard question.
This is hard. I mean, YC's is definitely, Paul Graham's is probably do things that don't scale, right? And YC's is probably like make things people want. Like that's their kind of like tried and true kind of like billboards.
This is the first thing that pops into my head. It's not that relevant, but I'm just going to say
I like it. I like it.
I think my unpopular opinion is we need to abandon San Francisco. And yeah.
Okay, we need to unpack this. Bima. I left San Francisco a long time ago.
What is it? Like the thing that makes San Francisco awesome is the density of kind of like innovators, right? That are kind of like coming in. This is by the way 100% the city, not like people in the city. And so like now that kind of like we've worked or I don't know, Hsu Ken and I kind of like constantly have this thing, right? Where it's kind of like if you look at most of America, there aren't any really kind of like big dense cities. And big dense cities kind of like create this thing where you kind of like have diversity, you have lots of people in the same kind of like places working together, all that kind of stuff. And so like one of the things that I think is really holding SF back is kind of like the lack of density and the lack of kind of like infrastructure. And so very unpopular opinion, I think we should move all of tech to like an Asian city.
Do you know who's
Okay.
going to email me you immediately?
I
Brian?
don't even know yet.
Gary.
Oh,
Gary Tan is
100%.
on this huge save San Francisco. He like hard disagrees with you.
This is a
That's
great
why it's
unpopular opinion.
Unpopular opinion.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like we should get Gary on the show and debate Brian with this. Email Gary right now, Brian.
God. Okay. So we need to abandon San Francisco. Hsu Ken, what would your billboard
Very
say?
quickly, unpopular opinion. The market is more important than the founder. I think VCs like to tell founders that they're more important than the market because it makes them sound founder friendly. We talk about being founder friendly all the time and how we are founders for founders. We are as pro founders as you can get. And I'm here to tell you the market is more important than the founder. And so I don't know. Brian, do you think that's unpopular at this point? I think most people don't believe it, but I don't know if it's unpopular.
Yeah, I don't know if it's unpopular. I think it's debatable, right? Because I think me and you kind of like have an opinion. I think it's debatable. I'm not sure if it's unpopular.
Yeah.
All right. So Hsu Ken, your billboard, market over founder, or like more important than founder.
Yeah, I would put market over, just to make it more unpopular and spicy, I'd put like market greater than you.
There we go. There we go. All right. Those are the 5 questions. Brian and Hsu Ken, thank you for answering all of them. So viewers out there, thank you for watching. If you like this video, remember to like and subscribe to us. #help June hit her OKRs. If you do, we'll do more of these. What questions would you like Brian and Hsu Ken to answer? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.